Lexi, I'm so excited to have you here today. Thanks for being here with us. I want to know, you have done so many things over the years in so many different versions of businesses, motherhood, and with your husband. What is something that has been the most surprising on this journey? Because I think you're at this place and sometimes we look at ourselves and we're surprised with what we've accomplished and what we've done. And then
Yeah.
there's this other part of us that's like, I mean, but am I? Like, I had this vision. I knew I was going to do this with it. So, what version of you is the version that's like, no, I mean, I knew you had that in you, and that's not surprising? And the
Yeah.
part of it that's like, yeah, I look around and I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, there's actually two things that stick out when you say that. One is my marriage. I think I always had this idea that if I was in personal development, which I am, like I teach it, I'm a master at the work, right?
Yeah.
And my husband was, and it would be fairly smooth sailing, right? Like we wouldn't hit too many hiccups. And I just thought like, oh, that's going to be easy, done.
Mm-hmm.
And then 3 years ago, while I was pregnant with our fourth child, like we really hit like the hardest season of our marriage. And it was like, oh, we may not make it out of this. Like we might have to leave. And I think I was just so shocked because I come from a split family. Like my mom's been married and divorced 4 times. My dad's been married and divorced twice and now on his third marriage. And so for me, it was like, if I'm getting married, it's like one and done, right? Like
Yeah.
that's it. And so hitting that point in my marriage was like, oh my gosh, okay. I've got to really kind of grieve the expectation I had that we would like get through hard seasons together and divorce would never be on the table and we'd really have our back and like be a team through all these things. And we just weren't there. Like we had changed so much, four kids, very fast, moving, 7 businesses, real estate portfolio. Like it was just a lot all at once. And
Yeah.
it just really hit us. So that was one hugely surprising part of my life that I just was not expecting. And then the second part, which actually came out of that season, was this like deep dive into my feminine and like my sexuality and sensuality and that expression. And I think I would have never expected that, like even 4 years ago, because I kind of had this judgment around the feminine and
Mm-hmm.
realizing like I had to end the war that I had unconsciously going on with the feminine inside of my consciousness. So that was a big surprise too.
Yeah. I think whether you're in the self development space or not, like motherhood and entrepreneurship are the biggest catapults to figuring out who you are and what you need, right?
Initiation.
And exactly, it's like jump all in and dive in.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you talk about is nervous system regulation. And just hearing the story of even just navigating your marriage, where my brain goes immediately is, how do you get yourself in a place before you need it?
Yeah.
Because we've all probably needed it, but to navigate whatever's going to happen. And I don't know that we talk about this enough before we're in those seasons, whether it's
Totally.
motherhood or entrepreneurship or any, even going to like college. I think about
Yeah.
who I was leaving high school, going to college, making all sorts of poor choices, like being in this place of like, how do we set our kids up for success? How do we set ourselves up for success for the things that are going to inevitably happen,
Yeah.
and we need to be able to manage it as who we are as humans? What are some of the
Yeah.
like super because we can, obviously go super in depth with that, right? There's so many layers to nervous system regulation, but what
Yeah.
is like the foundation that you're like, everyone should have this in place?
Well, it's such a great question. You're so right. Like, how do we empower ourselves with the tools before we need it so that we have a practice in the body that
Yeah.
can actually feel safety when we feel unsafe, right? Like, that's the biggest get in nervous system work. So, when we hear a lot in nervous system work, we hear regulation. And regulation is obviously where we want to get to. But a lot of people take that and they say, okay, I just need to learn how to like regulate my emotions when the emotions come up. And we're missing a key
Mm,
facet is we actually have to allow the emotions to cycle. And so
yeah.
that's the piece that I think a lot of people aren't really talking about in the general conversation of nervous system work is we've got to allow what's here to be here.
Hmm.
Most of us are now looking at nervous system regulation tools as another way to get rid of bad feelings that we don't want to feel so that we
Yeah.
don't have to feel them. And it's like, give me all the tools so I don't have to feel them. It's like, give me the aspirin so I can get rid of the headache versus, hey, I'm probably dehydrated. I need to drink water. right? And
Yeah.
so we want to get to the solution of, if there's an emotion moving in your body, if there's an energetic current moving in your body, you have to allow yourself to experience and allow that current to move and complete itself. Now, how do we do that in a healthy way with responsibility, and we're not like wallowing in our victimhood about how bad things are and all the things? Well, that's a practice. It's a practice. And it's one I had to learn because nobody taught me how to do that. And so it's really about not naming the emotion, not connecting story to it, but allowing whatever it is to move. So one way I do that, which is really great for mamas especially, is moving our bodies. So doing
Mm.
some nonlinear movement where we put on a song that's kind of resonant to whatever we're feeling, and we just throw it on and we allow ourselves to move. We can move frustration, we can move anger, we can move sadness, we can move joy, we can move numbness, like whatever it wants to move and however it wants to move, just move it. And then you'll find that your body naturally finds a state of regulation once that cycle of emotion has completed itself.
So good. My I have to ask though, because so much of our community and myself, like, what about in the moment when you're like, I don't have time for this? And I'm
Uh-huh.
thinking about like when my toddler needs to be regulated and
Yes.
regulating his emotions. I'm like, we don't have time for this. We got to go. T-ball practice is starting. Like, I don't have time to let you feel these emotions.
Yes.
It's real, right?
So
And I want
real.
to be such a good mom and such a good parent and be
Yeah.
like, okay, we're going to let you feel this and we're going to work through it.
Yeah.
But reality is we have somewhere to be. And
Yes.
I'm thinking that with myself too, of like, how do I do that for myself? Because sometimes we as moms just bury it because we're like, I don't have time to feel that right now.
Totally.
So I'm just going to cut it off. So then
Totally.
what do you do?
Yeah, so that's where it's important to have a practice, right? And this is why I love what you said, is you have to have something in place so your body
Mm.
has a conditioned tendency to move towards. So if my conditioned tendency when emotion comes up is I don't have time for this, keep it moving, got to keep going, I'm going to always close and shut down. I'm going to always collapse my system and kind of stuff it down, and that will become toxic stress, not just in my
Yeah.
life but in my body, right? Toxic stress, we now know, leads to all sorts of diseases and ailments, on top of just feeling disconnected from life, your body, yourself, right? So we need to have a practice of opening. So when we do have space, that's why we have to do that practice. Now,
Mm.
we're not perfect. We're going to have moments when we're like, okay, come on, get in the car, we got to go, right? Like I've got 4
Yeah.
kids, so I know that hustle, right? And it's perfect in those moments. Like literally just this morning, my youngest decided to get up at like 3:45 in the morning and just like be up. And it's like, okay, we're up. Here I am with my 2-year-old just up at 3:45. He's screaming. He does not want to stop screaming. So I literally take him outside in the pitch black, and we're just like screaming and working out the emotions together, because otherwise he's going to wake up my entire house, right?
Yeah.
And so that gave him a moment to almost reset and recalibrate. And then we come back inside, and then he was like, okay, cool. I'm not going to go to sleep, but I will chill on the couch until everyone else is up. Right. So we have to, it's give and take. You find moments to give your kids and yourself that space when you have it. And when you don't, sometimes you do have to say, hey, I'm coming back, put a pin in it, but make sure you
Mm.
come back later. Make sure you come back that night, go take a shower and shake off that energy, or put on a song and move it. But you've got to move the energy. You can't just let it stagnate.
I love that. And the movement resonates more with me, right? We hear a lot about journaling and being present with yourself, and that's great.
Yeah.
We're here for all of that. But for some people, moving the body, getting outside, the sitting is really uncomfortable and
Yeah.
really difficult. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't go there to that
Yeah.
discomfort, but having the flip side of it, kind of the yin and the yang, allows us to be able to play from both parts.
That's
So,
right.
what are some other things that are on either side of the kind of sitting and nurturing, or the getting outside? You mentioned taking a shower. I've heard so much about like the water is so
Huge.
important in so many different ways. What are some of the tangible things that's like, hey, get off this podcast today and do this with everything that you have?
Yeah. So go for a walk. Like that's the easiest one, right? Go for a walk out in nature. It could be around your driveway. It could, if you live, I used to live in New York City. I used to live in LA. If you live in a city, it's like go sit outside at a public park and let the sun hit your face for 5 minutes. What we're doing in those moments is we're resetting our system to a pace of, hi, I'm in a natural world. This is a natural world. I don't have screens in front of me. We are resetting the nervous system to a state of calibration with nature. 5 minutes is all you need. And it's so easy, right? Like I was someone who used to use the excuse, like, I don't have time, I'm so busy, blah, blah, blah. And I really had to like get bigger than my own bullshit, right? Like, come on, Lex, you got 5 minutes, go outside.
Yeah.
So that's one. Showers and baths, water is amazing, amazing. And again, like you can allow yourself to just be in that shower and picture whatever emotion that you have. Picture it just like running off you with the water, right? That's an easy way to do it. Somatic experiencing, shaking your body and just breath, sound, and movement. That takes like
Yeah.
10 seconds, right? So those are great ways. And, journaling and talk therapy and all of that's amazing, but we are animals, we're mammals, and we're meant to move. And most of us spend the majority of our day very sedentary in front of screens, and it cuts off all of our life force energy for moving and cycling. And it's why so many women feel disconnected from their bodies, disconnected from their pleasure, disconnected from their joy. They're like, where did I go? What happened to me? I don't even recognize myself anymore. It's because we don't have that life force energy flowing through us.
Mm. Now, in some ways, it's easier to just say, don't do any of this. Just navigate life day to day,
Yep.
survive. You'll probably be fine. But you're not going to totally live and you're not going to feel good all the
Yeah.
time. And so it's important to take on this responsibility. Let's talk a little bit about self responsibility, especially maybe you and your partner are both in self development. And
Mhm.
so, like you said, you thought, why would we have these other issues? We're working on all of this together.
Right.
But what about when you feel like you're the only one trying, when you're the
Yeah.
only one that cares to even put in the work and do a better job? Then how do you like know why you should keep going and push through? And I think for moms, we have a little bit of this. We're doing it for our kids,
Totally.
but there's still days where you're like, why is it all my responsibility? So
Oh, for sure.
how do you just like straight up say like, well, because it is.
Yeah. Well, the thing that got me through the whole like disillusion of what we call my first marriage with my husband, and now we're on our second marriage, but what got me through that whole season was I really centered around the idea of what type of woman do I want to be? Yes, for my kids. Like, okay, if my daughter was a grown up and she was watching every single move I made, would she respect me? Would
Mm,
she look at me and go, wow, like, I want to be like my mom? Or would she kind of be like, okay, that's questionable, right? How would my sons look at me? Would they say, wow, that's the type of woman I want in my future? And so, yes, for my kids, but then also for me, like I really got clear, like I didn't like the woman I had become. Like I had become this very like busy, overworked, over functioning, over giving woman that was just trying to make everybody happy, trying to do all the things, trying to be superwoman. And I just didn't like who I became as a woman. And so
mm,
centering the question around like, well, what type of woman do I want to be? Irregardless of whatever my husband is or is not doing, it doesn't matter. Like, what
mm.
type of woman do I want to be? How can I look myself in the mirror and be proud of myself at the end of the day and say, you know what? Yes, like you are doing it. And if at some point he doesn't line up and isn't a match for that, great. Then I keep it moving, but I do it from the place of knowing that I showed up 100% in my greatest expression and my greatest capacity.
Yeah. And I think if you start going down that route, there's two things. One is knowing that you're worth even those decisions and having
Mhm.
that self confidence and worthiness. So let's start there. If someone's on this journey and they're maybe not even consciously, subconsciously, they're sabotaging their own growth and ability to take action on this, what are some red flags? What are some things that did anything come up for you that you were like, oh, you're not even letting yourself be this woman that you want to be,
Mm.
and you're hitting these blocks of I'm worthy of setting maybe those boundaries you talked about, like people pleasing and
Yeah.
over committing, things like that, to be able to set the standard to be like, no, 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 like you need to come back home to Lexi and like
Yeah.
what it means to step here.
Yeah, I mean, it was so much. And this is why I think being in communities where you're having conversations like this are so important because we often don't see ourselves, right? Like we can't see ourselves objectively. And so to have either a coach or a network or friends of people that are going like, hey, this might be a blind spot for you. And I've always paid coaches. I've always had therapists. Like I've always really valued that outside opinion. And I just kept hitting the same cycles in my marriage where it's like, I feel like I can't win. Like I feel like I try all these things and like we're making a little bit of progress, but it doesn't stick.
Yeah.
And so I had to stop looking at my husband and going like, he's not, he's not, he's not, he's not, he's not. And start going, okay, well, what am I doing? Like, how am I perpetuating this cycle? Even though I think I'm doing all the work and trying all the tricks and all the communication hacks and all the things, where am I actually energetically in my own way? And so I started like really from the energetic body going, okay, like, what's my safety strategy in my nervous system? And again, I teach this work, so I know to look there, right?
Yeah.
As a child, my system patterned that safety means hyper independence. Do not trust anybody because whoever you trust is going to lead you in the wrong direction. Okay, that's what my nervous system pattern is safety. So even if it's killing me as a grown woman, that's what I'm patterned for as safety. So
Mm-hmm.
despite how my husband's trying to show up, I'm going to not let him lead because why would I let him lead? Because somebody's going to lead me down the wrong path if I give that
Mm-hmm.
to somebody. And so, despite his best efforts, despite me thinking like me nagging him and asking him, hey, I want you to be more in your masculine. Hey, I want you to lead. Hey, why aren't you doing X, Y, and Z? He didn't have space to because energetically, I wasn't giving him the room for that. And so, like, boom, that's one place I had to take responsibility and like get really humble. Like, Lex, this is you. Like, yes, he's got work to do, but this is you. You got to let him in. And then I looked at my physical body, right? Like, okay, so nervous system is the base of our somatic work. So somatic work is what happens. How does our body show up? And then I looked at all the ways in which my body actually closed in the face of intimacy, where I'm asking for more intimacy for my husband and more closeness, but my body actually didn't feel safe in that based on all
Mm-hmm.
the stuff I had been through, right? Leading up to this point. So it just became this like unpacking of all of these like patterns and conditions and ways of being that served me in such beautiful ways, has kept me safe, has got me through really hard times, has supported me through traumas that I went through. And now it no longer works for me. Right. And it wasn't working for my marriage. And he has his own stuff that he was healing through and all the things, but I can only speak for mine. And I also, again, I came back to that question. What type of woman do I want to be? Do I want to be the woman that waits for my husband to show up a particular way so that I feel safe enough in order to surrender and let go and let him lead? Or do I want to be that woman regardless of what's showing up in my external circumstances because I'm expressed, because I'm
Mm-hmm.
fully here, because I feel safe in my own body, because I have my own back? And that was like unwinding decades of conditioning and really starting to repattern safety in myself. And it was just like the most massive game changer and upheaval in my life. And it's been incredible. Hard work, hardest chapter of my life, but
So hard.
incredible. Yeah.
So hard.
So hard.
What time frame would you give people to say, like, it's a never ending time frame, right? But sometimes
Yes.
I feel like I almost, the first thing that comes to my mind is like 75 hard, right?
Yeah.
Like it's almost like this thing where people step into this and they're like, okay, I'm willing to commit for this period of time. I'm going to put this work in for this period of time.
Yeah.
Well, you're not going to see the result for a while, right?
Right.
You have to keep showing up when it's really, really hard. So how do you, pour that into yourself, knowing that you're just like trusting that you're doing the right thing and moving forward when you're
Yeah.
maybe not seeing a result?
Well, you're not going to see results quick, right? Because you're working in the foundational systems of your body. You're working in your energetic system in your body, which controls everything. It controls how your body shows up, controls your identity, your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, everything is controlled by this one thing, your nervous system.
Yeah.
And that nervous system got anchored in from ages 0 to 7, right? Now you can change it, but that anchoring from 0 to 7 got repatterned and reconditioned year after year after year after year. Now I'm 40, right? So I had, prior to this whole disillusion of my first marriage, 37 years of patterning, right?
Yeah.
37. So it's not going to change in a weekend. However, if you are taking on the practices in your body and not just from an intellectual standpoint, you can change it a lot faster because it's just conditioning, right? So
Mhm.
you have to recondition what safety means in your system. We have all oriented to what's safe differently based on how we grew up and the environment we grew up in. And so now, as an adult who has choices and freedom to take care of yourself and all of these things, it's our responsibility to re-anchor in what is safe now. right? And if we
Mhm.
don't do that, that's fine, but you're going to be running your entire life based on a pattern that was developed from 0 to 7. And this is where we see a lot of women, especially, get into these cycles in partnership and with their kids. And it doesn't really blow up until the kids leave. And then, like, the
Mhm.
kids are out of the house, and then they kind of look at their partner and they're like, oh, yeah, who are you? Like, we don't really have a thing anymore. We were just
Yeah.
doing this thing together. Or if, when their kids hit the teenage years and they're not so reliant on mom anymore, mom goes, okay, well, who am I outside of this identity called mother and
Yeah.
caretaker and nurturer, right? So, yeah, you cannot do the work, but in my opinion, this is just my opinion, it's going to find you one day or another. Eventually, it's going to
Yeah.
catch up to you, right? Because in my belief, our soul wants more than anything to be free. It wants to be fully
Mhm.
liberated. And I think the human part of us chases like business and money and travel in order to get a taste of that freedom. But the soul's really just like, hey, we want to be liberated. We want to be fully expressed. We want to be like
Yeah.
in our full expression here as a human. Can we do that in this lifetime? And it tries to get it in all these little ways. So it's coming for you one way or the other. It's coming.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been talking a lot in our community and to my husband, even the dream isn't those things. The dream isn't the business, the money, the trips to Disneyland, whatever it is. Those are how we act on some of the pillars of what
Yes.
we're pulling out of ourselves consciously and
Yes.
subconsciously of who we are.
Love
And
that.
I think that the only way we can really unpack what that truly means for each of us is doing some of this work and taking that self ownership.
Yeah.
Now, it is really real though. I say one of the worst things I've ever said in my life is when I first had my first son. People would say, how are you doing? And I'd be like, oh, I'm great. I love my husband. I have always loved him. He's great. But I mean, I could do it if I needed to by myself. And I'm like, now going into baby number 3, I'm like, sure, I could do it. I don't want to do it by myself. And I really, really, really appreciate him. But
Yeah.
there are times when we feel like we are in this side of, is it me, is it them,
Right.
right? And
For
there's
sure.
this saying of, if you're pointing the finger at everybody else, maybe look at like yourself.
Yeah.
But sometimes it truly is both. And you were
Yeah.
saying, you had to figure out what type of woman you wanted to be, and your husband had some things that he needed to work on too, but
Yeah.
that didn't really matter in the moment. In the moment, it really just mattered what you were working on.
Yeah.
So where is that balance of, hey, it's not just you, it is, you're not getting enough support, you are looking for help, you are doing a lot yourself,
Yeah.
and you need to just focus on yourself. Like, where do you find the balance,
Yeah.
especially when you're raising little humans together, right?
Oh, it's so big. And I'll tell you what, like, I'm such a fan of the book Fair Play. I'm sure it's a part of your
Yeah.
community. Like, I remember at one point when I read that book, I saw the film and I was listening to podcasts with her, and I'm just like, oh my God, yes. Like, you're giving a voice to women all over the world who are like, we are so tired. We are so tired of doing everything
Mm-hmm.
and, still expected to take care of the house, work, just like all the roles, right? And so there is this real shift. Like, we are in an unprecedented time that I think our generation and this particular generation of humans, like, we're still trying to figure it out. Feminism was in the 70s, and we're not that far off from that. But prior to that, we couldn't even get our own bank account without our
Mm-hmm.
husband's sign off, right? Like, because we were irresponsible with money. And then, like, fast forward, now we're like entering the workplace and equal rights and equal pay. And we still don't have a lot of that. But, we're trying to play the same game. And the truth is, we're two different species. Like, we're the same
Mm-hmm.
humans, but we operate very differently. And, I made my husband wrong for a really long time that he wasn't, quote unquote, pulling his weight. Because I'm like, listen, I'm making just as much money as you. I'm, making these humans in my body. I'm birthing these humans. I'm feeding these humans. I'm then like caretaking these humans. I'm taking care of the house, like, just the laundry list of things. And I made him wrong for a really long time. And it created, one, so much resentment, but it put him on the defensive. And so he felt like he couldn't contribute to me because I was handling everything. And like you
Yeah.
said, I mean, I said that after my first two, I was like, oh, I could do this on my own. because I'm basically doing it all by myself anyway, right? He could feel that. And so, while yes, he had a lot of work to do to step up and take more responsibility around the house and become more of that active parent in different ways, energetically, I had to take the like, I was shaming him basically the whole time energetically. Even if I didn't say it in person, I was shaming him energetically, like, oh, here I go again. I'm doing everything. What are you doing? Oh, da, da, da. And he could feel that. And so that
Yeah.
created this divide from us for years, for about 3 or 4 years. And then it hit when it hit. Like, we were sweeping it under the rug. And then finally that pile under the rug got so gigantic that we were tripping over it and we couldn't ignore it anymore. And it's like, okay, I actually don't like this person anymore. Like, I actually don't want to be with him anymore because I resent him so much. And he resented me so much for all of like the not enoughness he felt coming from me. Right. And
Yeah.
so it really is like, every couple is so unique in their journey. And again, it comes down to the thing, like, what do you truly desire? And
Mhm.
what, as much as my pride and my ego wanted to be mad and right about how like unequal and unbalanced it was and how unfair it felt, um, I wanted love. I wanted connection. I wanted to be seen. I wanted intimacy. I wanted partnership,
Yeah.
and we both had to figure out what that looked like for us as a couple. And every couple's unique, so it's going to look different for every couple, but we had to renegotiate, okay, what does partnership mean? Like, what
Mhm.
roles do you want to take on? What roles do I want to take on? What roles do we just throw away? Where do we delegate? Where do we have each other's back and doing these things we don't want to do, and we swap out, every other month? And we got really clear on what the deliverables were and kind of treated it like a business. And it felt so great because we just reconnected through that. Like, the thing that was driving us apart also became the point of reconnection, which is really powerful.
One of the things you said that was just such a light bulb moment for me is it's not even about the task per se, it's about what else you need.
Yeah.
And I think that is such an important realization because so often we as women and mothers, we don't, when we say, like, oh, I need help, and I say, well, what do you need help with? We
Yeah.
so often don't know,
That's
right? We're
right.
like, I don't know. And if your partner comes to you and they're like, well, okay, I'll do the dishes this week and I'll do the laundry and I'll do all of this, and then we're often still not happy, right? And it's
That was
like, well,
me. Yeah.
why are you not happy if they just did all these things for you?
Yeah.
But what you said is, I just need to be loved, I need
That.
to be seen, I need to be held. Those are some of the things that are so common. I'm thinking about myself. It's like, yeah, I actually really don't care if I'm the one cleaning the house. I
Right.
actually need support in these other ways. And I
That.
think that's so important for us to realize. And what we started talking about with that self regulation and that self awareness and that self ownership, that's how we realize those things, to even
Yeah.
know what to ask for.
That's
how
right.
did how did you navigate all of this with kids in the house, and now that you're kind of on the other side of it ish, in it, in a different version, in your new marriage as you call it,
Yeah.
what are some like family cultural practices that you put in place to say, like, hey, we're not going to get to that place again, so
Yeah.
here's what like the weekly culture looks like in our home?
Yeah, one of the biggest things is like, we have a weekly date. It's usually a date day because our nights are crazy.
Yeah.
But we usually take some time during the work week, and we'll take some time and we just voice any resentments, like any withhelds. We just voice it because that was such a big part of the crumbling of our first version of marriage, was there were so many unsaids. And it's like, well, I'm a peacekeeper on the Enneagram. I'm a 9. So I was like, oh, don't say the thing. Just keep the peace. Like, what's going to keep things good? And he's a challenger. He's an 8. And so he would often say things, but not say things in a way that I could hear it. Right. So he eventually learned, well, I can't say anything at all because it doesn't land well. So we were both playing this game of like, let's just keep the peace because we're so busy and we've got so much stuff. But all of that led to was disconnection. And
Mm.
again, all he wanted was connection. All I wanted was connection. And we were going about it in the craziest ways that didn't even make sense. Right. So,
Yeah.
speaking on SEDS, finding connection points physically, whether it's just like holding hands, sex isn't always available every week because we have a crazy life. And like, most nights I end up in one of my kids' rooms, he's in another kid's room. And it's just, parenthood.
Yeah.
Right? And so like how can we like take the energy, the sexual energy, and show it throughout the day. So like if I'm doing the dishes, sometimes he'll come up behind me and hug me, or I'll just like rub his shoulders a little bit and just lean over and give him a kiss. Little moments, like little touch points physically, are so important. The third thing is like we decided we wanted to be a couple that really showed our kids what being human in love was like, because we both didn't have that. And so
Mhm.
because our kids are kind of always around and always watching, it's like, how do we want to show our children what it means to be married, in love, and still very human? So a lot of times
Mhm.
we'll work through stuff together in front of the kids. Um, we'll show those like connection points of love, and they'll be like, "Oh, mommy, what are you doing? Why are you kissing?" And it's just so cute, right? But I
Yeah.
want them to know that that's how we can be together. So little things really go the furthest. And there's a saying, small hinges swing big doors. And I think
Yeah.
oftentimes we're looking for like these big solves and answers, but it's often the small things. And if anyone listening is like, oh my gosh, yes, I know I need this with my person, just have the conversation like, hey, if there was anything I did throughout the week, big or small, what would be the biggest needle mover for you to let you know that I love you and that I care? And find out what your person wants. Cause like love languages are awesome, but we need specifics. Like, what
Yeah.
is it? Right. And getting back to that thing, like, what do you actually need? Like
Mhm.
for my husband, it's the physical touch points. For me, it's like I need him to just like have my back on something when he feels my busyness and my overwhelm. And it's like, great, he does that, I do that, and it's like we're putting deposits into each other's bank, and it works.
Mm. All I can think about is that this is like a lifetime journey, right? And how important these little things are. And like you said, it is the little things where if we realize that this person is supposed to be our person
Yeah.
forever, right? That's the goal. The
Yep.
goal is when you're happy, if you're in that place, and, we'll break down a little more what it actually means that you guys are in your new version of marriage.
Mhm.
But if that's what it looks like for you, that's fine. But to be able to say, okay, now this is our goal is that this is forever, right? And
Yeah.
so this week, the little wrapping your arms around while I'm doing the dishes or rubbing my shoulders or whatever else, like that is what is most important in the big scheme of things. It's not the big gift per se that you're buying or going out to the big fancy dinners together or even having sex as much as maybe one person is desiring or the other. It's
Yeah.
the little things that are all being added together.
That's right.
And I love that you bring that up. What when you're sitting in that on the weekly basis, though, the couple of when you said those three steps, the first thing is bringing up the resentment, right?
Mhm.
If there's anything unspoken, have there been situations where something gets brought up and it can't be unpacked in the moment? Where it's
Yeah.
like, oh, whoa, I didn't realize that was there. And now we don't really have time to address it, or maybe
Yeah.
even the skills to address it on our own.
Yeah.
So now it just kind of sits there. So, what do you do in those situations where it can't really be solved?
Yeah, it's a great question. You're not always going to be able to solve it, right? And I would even go as far to say it's like it's not even meant to be solved,
Hmm.
right? Like sometimes we just have to speak the thing because it's our version of reality, right? So my version of reality is I feel a certain way when you did X, and what I need from that is Y, right? That's my version of reality. He may not feel that way. He may have no idea that that triggered me in a certain way, right?
Yeah.
But if we're in partnership, he can lean in and just affirm, hey, I hear that that's important for you. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that that was an issue, and I'll do better at that next time. Boom, solved. Right. So the solve is not that we have to fix it, is that we have to have our partner feel seen and heard in what's alive for them. And I think that was
Hmm.
the biggest switch for me is trying to fix things often causes more issues, right? Because
Mm.
if you have to fix it, that automatically puts one person as wrong or bad and puts the other person as right or good. Versus two versions of reality, both are valid, and you're voicing this to me, so this is important for you. Let me hear what's under that. What's under that is a need or a desire that's going unmet. Okay, if I can listen in that way, like, what is my husband actually saying here? What does he actually need? What's he desiring? Can I meet that need and desire in this moment? because that's all he really wants, and
Yeah.
satiate the whole thing. And if not, I can then work on it on an ongoing basis during the week, during the month, during the year.
Yeah. And so maybe it's those conversations or it's those little physical touch points or you said showcasing really what it means to be in love in front of your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I've heard is, well, that feels forced. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't feel real because I'm being mindful of it. What is the balance
Yeah.
between being mindful and saying, okay, here I go, I'm going to rub his shoulders,
Yeah.
and it just naturally coming and being a way of living? I feel like it
Yeah.
has to start with the kind of forced and then it becomes more natural. Has that been your experience, or
For
where
sure.
do you
I mean,
find that?
yeah, there was a point when I didn't want to touch my husband. Like,
Yeah.
truth, like just full transparency. I'm like, I do not want to see you, like, get away from me. And I know a lot of women get to that point. And I work with a lot of women at that point. Like, I am so far from this person that I can't even fathom getting close to them. Like, I have no desire to. And so when we get to that point, like, I think we don't want to force it because we don't want to create this energetic injury in our system of like, oh, I'm now having to be someone I'm not in order to make this person happy. It just deepens the fawning response, the pleasing, right? What I would say
Yeah.
is, let's talk about why. Let's talk about why you don't want to. Let's talk about why there's a lack of respect. Let's talk about, like, again, those are all those unsaids that oftentimes are there for a deeper invitation into intimacy with each other, right? Again, if you are married and you've been together for a long time, or if you're partnered for a long time with somebody, you better believe you're going to have plenty of opportunity for stuff like this, right?
Yeah.
And this is where I think most of us go wrong because we've been sold the Disney fantasy of find your person, everything's going to be great, right? And then when it starts to get shaky, we go, oh shit, something must be wrong with me or him or us. Instead of going, ooh, okay, this is an opportunity for more intimacy. And if we approach it that
Mm.
way and we start to look at, I wonder why I don't want to move in or towards my partner, then we can have a conversation first with ourselves, maybe with our coach, like, what's coming up for me? For women, it's usually a lack of respect, meaning we've lost respect for our partner somewhere down the line. Maybe we don't feel like they're pulling their weight, or they're a space for us to have big emotions. We don't feel safe with them, whatever it might be. Start with that and then start to go, okay, whatever's missing with my partner here, how can I provide myself some version of that first so I can take my partner off the hook, because they can feel it
Mm.
energetically. Then I take care of myself. For me, it was creating safety and containment with myself, having my own back, standing up for myself, creating stronger boundaries, like really, like, they call it like self-husbandry, right? Like you're
Yeah.
husbanding yourself,
Yeah.
right? And like really taking care of myself in the way I desired my partner to. Then it almost magically created this inspiration from him of like, ooh, okay, right? Like, I want to show up differently for this woman because she's showing up differently for herself. Now, some people won't follow suit. Some people won't get re-inspired, but at least you're taking care of you. And then in that sense, you can make a decision from a fuller place of you being fully online versus waiting for them to change. And so I wouldn't force it, but I would have a real conversation with your partner. And this is the conversation my husband and I had, where we were like, I literally said, like, I don't want to give you what you want right now. I like
Yeah.
actually want to do the opposite. you know, why is that? Well, let's unpack that. And he got to the point where he didn't want to give me what I wanted either.
Hmm.
And so we just had to have a really raw, hard conversation around, well, what is it that you really want? Like, let's get down to like the core base needed desire. Same for me. And then why do we think we're not there? And what would have to change? And then we went to the drawing board. He did his own work. I did my own work. And it was crazy. We gave ourselves 90 days. We said, okay, we're going to give ourselves 90 days. We're not going to make any decisions. We're not going to put any pressure. Like, there's no like, oh, sex or touch points or any, like, nope. Like, you do you, I'll do me, 90 days. And I would say within like 16 days of that, we were closer than we've ever been,
Wow.
because we took the pressure off. Like, you have to change. No, it's you. Like, you're bad, you're wrong, you need to change, you need to shift. And we just said, I got it, I got me, you get you, and we'll come back. And there was just so much magic that happened in that space. It was so amazing.
And how fast, but you didn't give yourself that fast timeline, right? You gave yourself space, and
Yeah.
then it it was so much shorter than that.
Yeah.
And now you worked in this space prior to that. But how does someone know when they're like, we can get so far on our own versus we need some help, we need some
Yeah.
support? Are there some, it's different for everyone, but I feel like it sits in this space where it's like, okay, well, have we even tried enough
Yeah.
for on our own? And
Yeah.
when do we know when to reach out? And what if one person's not on board?
Yeah. Well, and again, this goes back to don't wait for your partner to be a conditional perfect yes, right? For you to get what you came to get here in this lifetime. And I believe that we all attract the partners and choose the partners that we choose in order to get a really beautiful opening and lesson
Yeah.
and expression of ourselves. It is the most challenging and most profound dojo and workshop you can take is a marriage, is a relationship, right? It's where everything that we know gets put to the test. And so I would say if you keep hitting the same cycles, get some support. Preston and I, even though we're teachers in this work, we have coaches, we have therapists, we have older friends that have been married 50 years that we counsel with and, give us the real on what it takes to be together for 5 decades. And you just can't have shame in that. And I think that's a part of the issue with what's happening in relational dynamics today is we see these highlight reels of like all these perfect, beautiful marriages and families online and everything's amazing. And we don't see enough of the hard stuff. We don't hear
Yeah.
enough of these conversations of like, oh, wow, they went through a challenging season because there's shame around it of like, oh, we're not the perfect couple that everyone thinks we are. But this is real. Like we're humans. Humans are messy. And whether it's a best friend or a parent child relationship or a husband wife relationship or anything in between, when you're dealing with two humans, you're dealing with two entirely different worlds, realities, patterns, conditionings, traumas, closures, fear of intimacy. I mean, everything. How can it not
Mhm.
come up?
Yeah. And we're constantly evolving, right? We're constantly changing. And so when you may think you get there, to support and, hold this person, then they're like, oh, actually, I have this new version of myself that I'm
Yeah.
going to create. And you're like, oh, great. Who am I married to now? I'm
Yeah.
going to go over here. But I think to your point, there's this highlight reel, but there's also this other side where we see people not staying together.
Yeah.
And so we
Yeah.
think when we hit this discomfort, and I'm not saying that, divorce is bad by any means. It's the right choice for many people.
Yeah.
But I think it's so important to see the other side of it that's in the
That,
middle, right?
that,
That's
that.
like, hey, we're not a highlight reel and we're committed to seeing if we can do something different before we decide this isn't for us because we're
That.
actually not sure that we're not for each other yet.
Yeah.
And so the decision to end your current marriage
Yeah.
but find a new marriage together, was that something that you guys came up on your own? I've heard versions of that before. Or was that kind of ideation from support and mentorship? Where did that come to be and how did you make that decision?
Well, it's interesting. We started exploring separating, right? We're like, oh, maybe we
Mm-hmm.
need to separate and like live in separate places. And we had one of our properties was open. So it kind of was like perfect. It was like, oh, great. You stay at that property. I'll stay at the house, da, 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 da. And we were exploring conscious uncoupling, which there's a book around that, which is amazing. We said, okay, let's both listen to the book. And I was on a trip to Mexico with my girlfriends. And, I was just kind of like in that phase of like being okay with and almost like closing energetically the marriage for myself of like, okay, like I feel good with whatever decision I make. If I stay or if I go, like I feel good. And I started having this excitement around like, wow, what would it be like to be single? Like I haven't been single in a long time. And I just started thinking about it. And I played the game of like, oh, well, when I'm single, like I do this differently and this differently. And I was like, wait, why don't I do that now? Like, why don't I show up as that now? Because, people always get better after they get divorced, right?
Yeah.
It's this joke in the relationship world is like, oh, I prepared them for their next person. Like I did all the hard work so that the next person got the best version. But why don't we bring that best version of us to our current relationship? And it's because of the patterns and conditioning. So I came back from that trip and we weren't in a good place at that time, but I came back and we just had a conversation. I was like, if we did do this and we did stay together, like we really have to put the previous marriage to rest. Like who we were towards each other, the patterns that we created, like it was habitual and we were just looping. And it's like almost like we couldn't get out of it, right? And no matter how much
Yeah.
we knew, no matter how much support we got, like we couldn't get out of the same stuff. And so we really thought about it, like what would it look like to like meet each other right now, the woman I am, the man he is, and choose. Like, yeah, I actually still choose you. And so we like really sat with that for the whole week I was back, and it felt really good. And it was just like, this is what we need to do this. And Burning Man was coming up, and we always go to Burning Man, and we're like, they have this place called the Temple where people, you know, they get married there. We got married at Temple years ago. They have like ceremonies for people that they've lost. It's like a very spiritual place at Burning Man. So I said,
Yeah.
you know what? Let's do a burial ceremony at Temple. Let's bring our rings. Let's bring our old vows. Like, let's bring aspects of who we were in this marriage to the burial. And then let's bring like new vows, new aspects of ourselves, and let's re identify in that moment as a couple. And it was this really beautiful moment. He reproposed at Burning Man and reproposed again in Australia a few months later. But that moment, it was a ceremony, you know, and it was
Yeah.
um, a ritual, so to speak, because we are beings that are steeped in a ritual history, but we don't have rituals today besides marriage that really signify these transitions and these thresholds. And so we wanted to have a ritual that signified that. And we went to Burning Man with a bunch of our friends. We told them what we were doing. So when we came back, we had our community there to kind of witness us in this new
Mm.
experience. And I mean, when I tell you, the love that I felt, the connection I felt to my husband was like something I'd never experienced before. Like I literally am going to get teary eyed right now because I had been with this man 10 years. And even in the honeymoon stage, like we didn't have that level of depth and closeness. And it's because we weathered this really challenging storm, sometimes not well and not pretty, but at the end with a lot of maturity and a lot of transparency. And it was like I got to meet this man who was almost hiding from me the whole time because he was
Mm.
afraid. And he got to meet this woman that was hiding from him the whole time because I was afraid. And we really got to just go, okay, if we took it all off the table, if nothing was at stake, if we couldn't fail,
Mm-hmm.
if we can only win at this, what would that look like? And like that's the game we're playing now. And 3 years later, it's like best relationship I've had, best sex we're having, like feel closer to him than ever. Like I just, and whether we hit another season sometime soon, who knows? We likely will. We now feel like we are bulletproof and we have been through something
Yeah.
so challenging and so hard that we can weather any storm, which feels really good.
So good. And you have the tools. And it isn't just like you went to this temple, had the ceremony, and you're like, look, we're we're refreshed. It's like, no, we've done the solo work. We've
Yeah.
done the together work.
Yeah.
And even like you've said throughout this, more solo work than together work.
More. Yeah.
And being able to now bring that to the table, not just in the rebirth of the marriage,
Yeah.
but the day to
That.
day conversations and
Yeah.
showing up. And that's so huge and so important.
Yeah. I also
Now,
want to say too, it's we're still doing the solo work. Like
yeah, you
that
can't stop.
ever. And like the commitment we made 3 years ago to like really take care of ourselves in that way, it's been so fulfilling for each of us on a solo level that it's like we will never stop that. We know that that was a part of what was in the rupture between us, is that we were so reliant on the other person to take
Mhm.
care of us in some way that we weren't willing to take care of ourselves. And so it's a journey that keeps unfolding as we keep committing deeper to the self work.
Yeah. And what a blessing for your kids to see that, right? To because they need to see, hey, it's about you at the end of the
Totally.
day and taking self ownership and taking that on.
Yeah.
Now, there is the scary part of that though, where the work never ends,
Yeah.
right? And wins wins enough. And I think about
Yeah.
that in this terms of like your self-work. And also you guys have a lot of moving parts. You guys
A
have a lot
lot.
of businesses.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of different things.
Yeah.
How do you find the balance between like enough is enough, or we want to, start this new business, we want
Yeah.
to start this new venture, we want to tap into this as a family? How do you gauge, like, is this us chasing this, you know never ending search for joy and happiness,
Yeah.
or this is super aligned and we can hold more, we
Yeah.
can take more, and we're meant to do this. Like, how do you
Yeah.
know when you're pushing versus like pulling and being calm?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. I think for a really long time we were pushing and trying to like get there. And one of the big things that unraveled in this solo work, I would say for me first, and Preston's like really come into his own version of this recently, is like we're already there. Like we've arrived.
Yeah.
There's no other place to get to than right now. We have our dream life, we have our dream family, our dream house. Like even if house went away, businesses went away, like we're here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now anything that we create from this space has to feel really aligned, because if we don't need any of that to define who we are as humans, well, then what do we want to play with? How do we want to create? What do we want to do? And so life has gotten really interesting, because as great as that sounds from a philosophical standpoint, it's created a lot of issues, because a lot of the businesses that we created from trying to get there, trying to prove
Yeah.
something. And if we no longer need that to satiate a feeling within ourselves, well, then the business no longer feels aligned. So we're making a lot of changes on the back end, and we're shaking some stuff up, and it feels good and a little scary at times.
Yeah.
But it's this thing where like, you've landed at that place. I know I've landed at that place. And all of my older mentors speak about this place. It's like, you just the world no longer defines you. You are no longer hinged on something out there, money in your bank account, X amount of people in your programs, whatever, downloads, followers, whatever metric you're measuring your success on. When that no longer means anything to you, whether it's up or down, you've arrived. And that place is
Mm-hmm.
where both he and I are at, and we're at it with our relationship and our family. And so now it's about art and beauty, and how do we live more artfully, and how do we bring a deeper level of expression to everything we're doing, whether it's our work or our time with our kids or our time in the garden or with a dog or with each other. It's how do we just expand and anchor even deeper into this
Mm-hmm.
experience of living? Like, what would it mean to live and experience life fully? Not just as a concept, but like as a felt experience in the body.
Yeah. Do you think you could have gone at it from that mindset from the beginning, or you had to arrive before you could have the space and the personal growth to be at a place to even understand that? Because we hear this a lot from the people that have arrived, that are
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's really easy to say, now that I'm here, I want to do things that are aligned. Now that I'm here, I
Yeah.
want to be really clear with my intention.
Yeah.
But there is often this season of hustle, and not even hustle, but figuring out what does feel good and where you want to
Totally.
be. And so, where is the balance between skipping that and not being able to skip it and
Yeah.
just going through it? And especially from the terms of parenthood and motherhood, because there's this state that I think a lot of people, especially with younger kids, struggle with, because they're like, do I put the work in now to be
Right.
available later,
Right.
knowing that I'm missing some of the things now?
Yeah.
Or do I not hit maybe the level of success that I desire because I want to be more present now?
Yeah. Well, that's such a great question. And the answer is like, you'll know when you know. And some
Yeah.
people need to go through, like I had to go through the season of hustle, the season of push, the season of prove, the season of trying to be superwoman and do it all and be it all, to get that that's not what I desire. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I had a very early taste of money, because I worked real hard at a young age and was quite successful in my early 20s. So it was never money for me, because I learned that lesson early the hard way in my 20s. Like, oh, I got the
Mm-hmm.
money. I got some level of success and fame in the entertainment business. This doesn't mean anything. So now what do I want to do? But for
Yeah.
me, it was more about like proving that I could be the type of woman that I had dreamed about, like this expectation of this, like, do it all and be it all and have it all. And, wherever the fuck that came from, I don't know. But
Society, life, all
yeah,
the
all
things.
of it. And like a lot of it self-imposed, a lot of it from my family, a lot of it from society at large. And I had to taste that to realize that that wasn't it for me.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you got to try a sweater on to realize you don't like the fit, and
Yeah.
I tried that sweater on and was like, no, this actually doesn't suit me anymore. And some people just know. But when you when you know, like my older friends say, like,
Yeah.
when you have arrived, when you no longer are like looking at people on social media going, oh, I wish my business did this, or I should have done this, or did it. You're not in that comparison. You're not in that space of like the anxiousness of I need to launch, or I need to do something, I need to build, I'm so far behind, where you're just like, okay, what do I want to create? How do I want to
Yeah.
build? And so it just depends. It depends on where you're at, what season of life you've
I
traversed.
love that. I think
Yeah,
that you're 100% right. That is exactly the case. It's going to be different for everyone.
everyone.
And it really is, you're not going to know until you're there, until you know what it feels like for you.
That's
Before
right.
I hit my last final questions, where can everyone tap into your energy, your space, your world? Where do you want to send them?
Yeah. So currently, like the platform online I'm most on is Instagram. So at Alexi Panos there. If you want to come work with me in person and do some restructuring and reconditioning of your nervous system and somatic body, bridgeexperience.com. It's 2 weekends. My husband and I take you through literally a repatterning of your system, creating and anchoring safety in the body. And then for any women that really want to dive more into your feminine and find that safe space within yourself and really allow yourself to express in ways and find those textures of your aliveness that you might be yearning for, awakenthemuse.com is that. So find me in all those
Amazing.
places. I've got podcasts and all the things, so you can search my name and you'll find me.
And we'll link that all below, of course, too. So
Awesome.
thank you so much. Now, if we've talked about so many different layers, and I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make in the self growth industry is over consuming without action,
That.
right? And we need to make moves. And we've talked
Yes.
about some like real things that we could do today. We
Yeah.
talked about how you went outside with your son and things like that. But for the woman listening, that maybe she wants to change things up in her relationship, maybe it's with her goals in her business, it doesn't really matter. But when it comes to coming into you and that self ownership,
Yeah.
what is one step that we could take today? But I'd like to take it a step further and say something that they should maybe be doing consistently, not just
Right.
one day today, but something that should become a habit that's a small lift to be able to really step into that new version of yourself and that self ownership.
So the biggest thing is embodiment. Like, it's the difference between like I could read about salsa dancing for decades. I could be like the foremost expert on salsa dancing from having read all the books and watched all the best dancers and learn the techniques by sitting there and taking notes. For decades, I could study salsa. But until I get my butt up on that dance floor and put one foot in front of the other and shake my hips and see where it actually lands, I will have zero indication of where I'm actually at on my journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're right. We live in a very uh, consumption driven society where more is better, more podcasts, more books, more audios, more TikToks, more, just give me more, because we think more information will make us safer. If I know more, I'm safe. If I know more, I'm safe. But until it lands in the body, our life doesn't change. And so, really, the biggest step I would say is whatever you're most into, whether it's something we explored on this podcast or a book that you're reading or something that you're like, oh, this is like, I love this idea of nonviolent communication or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Whatever the thing is that your body, your soul is like, this, I want more of this, embody it, practice it, build a practice. So daily practice is the best. 3 minutes a day of anything is much better than even 1 hour a week of doing
Mm.
something. Because again, we're conditional beings and our bodies are going to take the path of least resistance. Meaning, if you're in a practice, your body's going to give you the practice all the time. And so, whatever you're practiced in, you get more of. And most of us are practiced in a lot of habits that no longer work for us as a strategy, right? They worked at some point, but they no longer work. And so, embodiment is everything. So, if it's, hey, I want to have a better relationship with my husband, great. Commit to yourself without even talking to your husband. What's one thing I could do that I know he would love, that I can actually get my body into a physical space with him and do, whether it's a words of affirmation or physical touch or having honest conversations with him or giving him space to be with his friends, whatever it is. Like, do something that puts your body in a new scenario and repatterns a new anchoring of safety.
Mm.
Because the reason you're not doing it is because you don't feel safe to do it yet. So whatever it is, wherever change is, right? Most of us want something different, Oh, I want to be this. I want more of that. I want less of this. If it's money, right? If it's money, oh, I want more money. Okay, well, you don't have more money because you're patterned and conditioned to have the money you have. So if you want more money, you have to create a new pattern and a new condition in the body. What does that look like? Well, that means you can go out and sit and have a money date with yourself. Like I have a money date with myself and I do it once a week. I look at all my finances, I get really excited about it. And then Preston and I have money and margaritas once a month where we sit with margaritas, we talk about our money, we vision about our money. We have this relationship with our money, but you have to actually do a different thing. Do
Yeah.
something different. And so it's kind of a general answer, but the impetus is to really like start doing something. If you're reading a book and you love the book, go back, open up one chapter and like pick one page and nail that page for a week. Like I literally go back to my books. I have highlights and notes all over it. And I'll just like flip it open. I'll read some of my highlights and my notes. I'm like, cool, this week I'm embodying this thing. Just this thing. One idea will change your life if you actually practice and embody it. Most people, ideas don't change their life because it's like idea with no practice. And so we have to
Yeah.
implement.
Gosh, that book example is so good because how often do we go, oh, this is so good. And then we shut the book and we never look at it again. And it's
Totally.
not implemented, it's not
Totally.
acted on. And it's like, no, go back and look at those notes and embody that. So I love that example specifically. And also definitely turning money dates into money and margaritas
Oh,
as
money and
well. So be
margaritas,
careful of that.
girl. Yes, once that
Yeah,
baby's out.
exactly. I'm like, that sounds really good in about 2 weeks. So,
Yes, exactly. I'm telling you, like, you got to make it fun because most people they have this like, thing with money. And it's like, of course, money doesn't want to be your friend. Like, you don't want to be friends with it. So you've got to make it fun and inviting. Like, you got to
yeah.
be a good date.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, now what is something that you're really excited about in this season? You've gone through so much transformation personally over
Yeah.
the last couple years. You have so many things that you've created success around that like you know what success is.
Yeah.
Now, what is it that you are lit up about? What's a goal that you currently have? What's making Alexi go, this is where I'm at?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so many things. Like I said, like I'm really in that place of like, oh my gosh, I've totally arrived. So now what? Right. And
Yeah.
I've always been an artist. Like I've made films before and done experiential art and physical art on a canvas. And my artist is really coming back online. So there's two major art exhibitions that I get to start this year. One of them might be a fairly large undertaking, so it may take me some time, but I'm starting them next month. So that makes me really
Ooh.
excited. Yeah.
Is there any way that our listeners and community can support these ventures?
Yeah, stay tuned to Instagram because I will be promoting them there and I'll actually need support from women specifically. One is it's for my ladies. Like it's literally all about redignifying women to ourselves because
Awesome.
we've lost the appreciation and the reverence for what the feminine is. And so this whole piece that I'm doing is around that.
So good.
Yeah.
Lexi, thank you so much for being here today. So many good takeaways. And I just can't wait to see how our community embodies all of this. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.